Okay, there's a little thing somebody made a comment on Facebook, and I had to reply. Somebody I went to school with, high school with, and what you see going on now, it's nothing new. With immigration, ICE, it's nothing new, and it's not about illegal immigration. It's about people being the wrong color skin. It doesn't. It's not about immigration. It's. I mean, the hate for the people are facing now. I faced all my life, and it has nothing to do with immigration. It's just discrimination. I mean, Lyndon B. Johnson established anti-discrimination laws, desegregation. That never happened. If it did, we wouldn't have redlining. Uh, there wouldn't be so many voter suppression laws in so many states. And that's contrary to the U.S. Constitution. And any laws repugnant to the U.S. Constitution are null and void. But nobody's speaking up. But there's a lot of things people aren't speaking up about. So let's speak up. People say it's political. I give a shit about your politics. I'm apolitical. I'm talking about the Constitution, about the broken promises and the shattered dreams because nobody lived up to it. Nobody enforces it. I mean, we are living with a two-tier justice system. And the young lady that posted this, her comment, she knows just as well as I do. It's not about immigration. It's about the color of your skin. Okay, so anyways, this so-called Facebook friend, oh my God, I heard that ICE is going after anyone brown. She should have put anybody not white. Just put it that way. Oh my God, I heard that ICE is going after anyone brown. Guess I will be heading to one of those foreign torture chambers. Now, we went to, like I said, we grew up in the same neighborhood, same schools, just led different lives. I can't count the amount of times I was detained for being too dark. As for a green card, I didn't even know what one was. I didn't. I was just a little kid. Called the N-word and told go back to Mexico. Seems like the old days are back in Brighton Park. That's in Chicago. Brighton Park. Remember how almost everyone in the neighborhood was anti-Mexican. LOL. I remember nobody caring to find out I wasn't an immigrant. My grandpa was a World War II vet, and that didn't matter. Well, back then, nobody asked or cared. Pretty much happening again. Had people on the internet telling me they'll have Trump deport me. If I survive getting to and from grade school and high school, I'll get through what you're safe from. Should have seen all the people that gathered to chase my family out the day we moved into our old stomping grounds, Brighton Park. Remember the HEADS? Remember what HEADS was an acronym for? Help Eliminate and Destroy SPICs. The good old days are back again. Glad you're safe, to be sure. The HEADS have a Facebook page called the Heads of 43rd and often speak of going back to Brighton Park with AR-15s and hang in Kelly Park to see if people in the neighborhood would try something. Hey, remember the riot at Kelly High School because of busing? The law of desegregation by LBJ didn't work very well, did it? How about the Marquette Park Nazis or the Popes? Protect our people, eliminate SPICs. We had the KKK around as well. Oh my God, the good old days are back. So much for we hold these truths to be self-evident that all are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. When is that going to happen? In a nation of laws, it's illegal to violate the oath, mandatory fines, removal from public service, and incarceration. The basic obligations of public service aren't being fulfilled. Due process doesn't exist. Never did, never will. I know from experience. The legal battles I face just because of the color of my skin. But I overcame, learned the law, and held everyone to the letter of law on every occasion. I love that term, the letter of law. I use the spirit of the law. So we all see it, hear, and say the same thing. It never fails, but that's only in a court of law. You can't tell that to a person who thinks the law doesn't apply to them. Do you know legally qualified immunity can't exist? It's contrary to the rule of law, the law of the land, the founding principle of the law of the land, and any law repugnant to the U.S. Constitution is null and void. And actually, the rule of law was established to quash qualified immunity. If you read the history, it's in the Magna Carta. It was clearly written to abolish qualified immunity, and they started using that in '56, I think it was, Pearson versus Ray, arresting some white preachers for sitting in the colors only section. And the court said, well, they get qualified immunity because, they thought it was a law, they read the signs, colors only, so they arrested them. They were acting in good faith. It was because these idiots didn't know the law. But they did. They knew there was no law against that. Okay, the rule of law, and it's okay. I put, did you know legally qualified immunity can't exist? It's contrary to the rule of law, and the rule of law being the founding principle of the law of the land. Any law repugnant to the U.S. Constitution is null and void. But you already know all too well about the two-tier justice system. It bows to the wealthy and ignores the downtrodden. The Constitution was written to serve the needs of many, not the greed of a few. So in a nation of laws, literally, you have to be a lawyer to obtain due process. I help people out with stuff like that. Been doing it before we became parents. Did you know immigration is a civil case? Legally speaking, of course. I may not have a lot of money, but at least I know how to keep a lawyer and judge to their legal obligations as prescribed in the rules of professional conduct and the code of judicial conduct. I just take the rules and the codes with me and make sure everybody plays by the rules and the codes. They took the oath to do that. That's effective assistance of counsel guaranteed in the Sixth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. I may not be safe on the street because of the color of my skin, but in a court of law, nobody plays by the rules and the codes, and that's a conspiracy against rights under the color of law. Punishment, fines, removal of public service, and incarceration in the case of death, the death penalty. It's on the net. I actually post about these laws to keep others safe from the injustices of the justice system. It's amazing how two people can grow up in the same neighborhood and experience different lives. She didn't experience anything. I did. And in the high school we went to, I was very unpopular. Simply because of the color of my skin. There weren't too many people in that school with my level of melatonin. It's just a racist move. It's deportation of immigrants. It's just at the top of the list. The list always changes. There was a time that the blacks were at the top of the list, during the civil rights movements, and then the Mexicans moved to the top of the list. When they were doing the union, farm workers union movement, Cesar Chavez. When the Muslims were moved to the top of the list. How about when the Jews were moved to the top of the list? Those guys with the tiki torches. Jews will not replace us. And then people saying to assimilate, how many blacks have assimilated to the Christian faith and yet still had their churches bombed because they weren't the right color Christians? It's the list. It's just as it always was and always will be, black and white. There's people on the white list. The WASPs. White Anglo-Saxon Protestants. Yeah. Protestants are at the top of the list. The WASP are at the top of the white list, and they're doing everything they can to get people to join that. I know quite a few Latinos that subjected themselves to the good one analogy. They like being called one of the good ones, not like the rest. Me, I've never been known as one of the good ones. I've always been known to be just like the rest. Okay, but I mean, that was a weird form of racism there. Being chased through my own neighborhood by white supremacists and the good ones, the ones that weren't like the rest. And this one guy cracked me up. I don't even speak Spanish, and he did. He was just really light complected. And, he was Mexican when it was convenient, when he was out around other Mexicans, or, when somebody was speaking Spanish, But indirectly out in the neighborhood, and, going out and have good times with friends. His friends were the white supremacists, and he did what they did to fit in. I guess it kept them from giving him beatdowns and waiting for him after school, before school, to come to school, in school, at recess, at lunchtime, in grammar school, in high school. This guy even, helped them hunt me down during grammar school, helped them hunt me down during there was quite a few Latinos that did that, Mexicans in Brighton Park. And I'm assuming is because they didn't want to get treated like me. But, it's hard to tell who's hardest to live with when it comes to racism. That's all I see. I went through growing up. I seen it happen before. My dad, my mom talked about it happening when they were young. And the list always changes. So you're on the A list, I guess it's called, the white supremacists will call the A list the white list, and then there's the black list. And so if you're not white, you're on the black list. If you're Asian, you're on the black list. I grew up being called the N-word. First time I felt it an insult, and my reaction was wrong. Somebody called me on where I said, I ain't black, and then after that I never said it. I felt embarrassed because I said that. And I was only about 10 years old, 11 years old, and I felt shame that I said that. Because in my neighborhood, in the county I lived in, the city I lived in the state I lived in the country I lived in, if you weren't white, you were just another fill in the blank. And I accepted that and wore it as a badge of honor. Even though I was taught to hate other races, I didn't subject myself to that. People talked about blacks, I had to go find out. I met a lot of black people, beautiful. They used to listen to the same music I did. I listened to Motown. I got criticized for that in my neighborhood. I was a big fan of James Brown, Ray Charles. I knew almost all his songs. I used to sing and dance when the music was playing, and even when it wasn't. And a lot of people in my neighborhood didn't appreciate the music I listened to. I listen to Spanish music. I listen to opera. I listen to reggae. I've listened to bluegrass, country, westerns. That was before country and western got together, when they were separate entities. But, I listen to music is universal. I listen to house music. People in my neighborhood call that the N-word music. I got made fun of when I dated Asians. Got a little bit of hate, in Chinatown, just a little bit, but, one or two people didn't make me look down on all the Chinese people. I met Japanese women, dated, I've always believed that, that all are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. And I've always accepted that. So when I see other people, I just see my fellow citizens. But, just because I was treated harshly by bigots, racists, idiots telling me to assimilate when they haven't assimilated to the United States Constitution, and I have. Those are self-imposed ethics. When I read the Constitution when I was 10, knowing this was my country and those were the laws, I respected them, I loved them, and held them to my heart to be true and true. But it's rare that anybody else in this nation does, especially when it comes to lawmakers, and they're the biggest law breakers. They don't live up to the oath. They don't live up to the basic obligations of public service. Comes to courts, lawyers and judges don't abide by the rules or the codes. That's effective assistance of counsel. Effective assistance of counsel is a double-edged sword. It cuts through everybody in that courtroom because those are the legal obligations of all lawyers and judges in every court, and any violation of the rules or code is misconduct, and violating any of the rules or the codes is misconduct, and it's mandatory to report misconduct in every court of law, and nobody does that, which clearly shows that they conspire to deprive rights, your constitutional rights of due process, fair trial, quick and speedy trial, effective assistance. You were denied your due process rights in their entirety if they aren't playing by the rules and the codes, but you'll never know because you don't know what they are. Unless you look them up, print that shit out, highlight all the issues that you want to talk to the judge that they didn't do, and all the issues that your lawyer didn't do and the opposing party didn't do. The judge is required to report your lawyer and the opposing party for violations of the rules of professional conduct, as well as themselves for violating the code of judicial conduct. The lawyers are supposed to report each other for violations of the rules of professional conduct, and the judge for violating the codes of judicial conduct. Everybody, winds up being fined, removed from service, and incarcerated, and you wind up standing in court by yourself. Nobody's going to play by the rules or the codes unless you take that shit with you to court. All right? That's due process. All right? Make sure everybody plays it out. Anybody going to court right now? You got a case? Take the rules and the codes. And you will get the due process you need. And they're in layman's terms, people, not hard to understand. You should just give it a try, give it a shot. Just imagine if, when the Constitution was written, the Declaration of Independence, at the very beginning, it says we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Imagine if, when the forefathers wrote that they actually lived up to it. Nobody's lived up to it since. It's the law of the land. And nobody's lived up to it. I'm talking about your public servants. Yes, legally, you can sue somebody for violating that, withholding that from you. That's your constitutional right. And as a United States citizen, that's your birthright. It's a part of your trust fund. If you look up the public trust doctrine, that's part of your trust fund. All right, people, I just wanted, this isn't about politics. This is just clearly about racism. I don't think it's a joke. Oh my God, I heard ICE is going after anyone brown. Guess how I'll be heading to one of the foreign torture chambers. Like it was some kind of joke. That's ridiculous. But this is the state of America. This is the state of the world, actually. You know. But just imagine if the rule of law did exist. People wouldn't be saying anything like that. You wouldn't be seeing ICE doing these stormtrooper raids. I mean, if these people were actually committing crimes, what crimes were they committing? Some people say, well, they came here illegal, that's illegal. Well, you know, speaking from my father, he was from Monterrey, Mexico. And I read the history, you know, and the history of other countries. And numerous times, the United States government sent entities in these other countries to overthrow their democracy, duly elected officials to install a puppet regime. And why? So they can reap the benefits of that country, you know, take all their mineral rights, you know, whatever you have, you know, it's the public trust doctrine, so they can evade the public trust doctrine. And considering the fact that Wall Street has always controlled the RNC, the DNC, you know, which is illegal if you read the basic obligations of public service. No such thing as legal bribery. If you go by the law, of course. I that's all I speak on, the law, and everybody that breaks it. I give a shit if you're Republican, Democrat, independent, libertarian, or one of those whack job crazy. What are those people call themselves? Sovereign citizens. You can't claim you're a sovereign citizen if you're not in your own country. You know, buy your own country. And people, come on, you know, hasn't anybody noticed that nobody's living up to any of these laws? I speak to you about so many of them. All those laws I post about are the legal obligations of our public servants, and nobody's doing that. And I'm doing my best to show you who's supposed to take care of it and why, and I showed you nobody's going to stop all this injustice in the justice system unless you go there with the law yourself and say, hey, you're breaking the law, this is the law. You know, this is the law of the land, these are my constitutional rights, the Bill of Rights as a United States citizen, my birthrights. Start with that. Start with that. Remember, qualified immunity can't exist. It's repugnant to the rule of law. And they started throwing it around in 56 in Pearson versus Ray, arresting white preachers for sitting in the coloreds only section. It wasn't a law, but the police didn't like white folks sitting with colored folks, so they arrested them. The colored folks, the black preachers got involved, they got arrested. And their religious rights, their religious freedoms didn't even exist. So, I mean, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, depending on what state you're in. But since these preachers went to the South during the civil rights movements to engage with people to get them to vote, to get them to register to vote, and to get them to vote. And, well, the cops didn't like people, they didn't like voting. So the judge said they were acting in good faith. No, they were acting in a sense of racism, bigotry, hatred. But they've been using it since then. The courts have been using the qualified immunity under the good faith. They use it as, it's ridiculous. They no. They're violating the oath of public service when they do that. They're violating the oath they took. Did you ever read the cop's oath? Serve and protect. The Constitution. Serving we the people. Now, in every law I showed you that, in public service, the public interest comes first and foremost. The public interest is always first and foremost. Private interests are secondary. All lawyers are supposed to, when they represent you, they're supposed to represent you with zest and vigor as if it was their very own life at stake. Their very own life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness at stake. But they don't do that. They don't do that. Procrastination is strictly forbidden in court. But that doesn't happen. The quick and speedy trial. You hear lawyers say, well, that's only in criminal cases, but if you go over the rules of professional conduct, diligence is required. Expediting litigation is required. You would be diligent in expediting litigation. If you aren't, that would be incompetent, and competence is required in the rules of professional conduct. It's a law. It says competence. Expediting litigation. Diligence in expediting litigation. And then people who bring these frivolous and fraudulent suits to court, that's ridiculous. It quite clearly states in the rules of professional conduct in the preamble, you cannot bring forth frivolous and fraudulent cases, otherwise known as a slap suit. That's nothing but legal harassment. Rich people like to do that to poor people, so to shut the hell up and go away. And poor people say, hey, I can't afford a lawyer, and I might as well just stop what I'm doing, because then I'll have to pay all these legal expenses. But if those poor people read the rules of professional conduct, they would learn that, these people, they're, candid towards a tribunal requires that they can only come to court with issues that have, that are factual. There has to be fact-based, it has to be legally. No, you can't go in there with Facebook memes, thoughts and prayers, hurt feelings, like Linwood and Sidney Powell and all those other people that filed cases in court to stop the steal. And every one of them was thrown out because they were all flagrantly false and frivolous claims. There was no substance. And all they got were fines and, a slap on the wrist. But they took an oath to the U.S. Constitution, so they violated the oath because effective assistance of counsel, the requirements are effective assistance of counsel in the rules of professional conduct and the code of judicial conduct, and nobody abided by that. So that's mandatory fines, removal of public service, and incarceration for Linwood, Sidney Powell, and all those other people that decided to do something really stupid and break the law by bringing those cases to court. Now, if you or I went into court and lied, we would be cited with perjury, and you would be locked up for that. That's cause for incarceration, mandatory time, mandatory penalties. So why is it lawyers and judges will hit you with perjury if you go to court and lie? But when they go to court and lie on a daily basis, nobody says nothing. Which is really sick. But that's what I do. I do my best to try to help people by introducing them to laws they didn't know about, laws that are constantly being broken. Ever since these institutions were created, nobody's doing their job. Nobody wants to work. When you file a conspiracy for a conspiracy against rights under the color of law, you just type in conspiracy against rights under the color of law complaint form. It'll take you to the DOJ, the FBI, the Department of Interior. I forgot. There's other groups. They have civil rights violations, and those are civil rights violations. Not abiding by the rules in the code. Those are mandatories in a court of law. Nobody does that. Okay, rant over, people. I'm just, there's some young people I know out there that are having some hard times. And I don't want to see any of them go through what I went through. just because, nobody's abiding by the law in the court. They're literally making innocent people look guilty and guilty people look innocent. The scales of justice on a monetary scale, you're worth your weight in gold. If you don't have the gold, you get sold into a life of indentured servitude. And that's what's happening now. That's what happened to me. And because of what they did to me, my quality of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness has been at a minimal. Well, such is life. I'm too old to recover from that. But I'm not too old to teach you how to do how I did and seize the day. Be the hero in your own story, as I was in mine. I had no help. The only person that had my back was my dad. Anybody else that claims to just use my back as target practice. And I was okay with that. Growing up in a racist neighborhood, you don't make a lot of friends. Even when mom tells you, hey, go out and play nice with the bigots. Try to make friends with them. Try to make friends with somebody that hates me because of what you did. My mom asked me, well, what did I do? I said, you had kids by a Mexican. Dark ones. I had people tell me, you don't like the way things are here, go back to Mexico. I'm not from Mexico. Well, go to Mexico if you don't like it here. If I don't like you breaking the laws, denying me my birthrights as the United States, if I don't like that, I should leave the country. No. Number one, you yell assimilate. I assimilated to the United States Constitution. I abide by those laws. And as a Mexican, I taught a lot of people not to break the laws. You'll get arrested just for going to the store, walking to school, coming home from school. I nearly got arrested running to catch the bus leaving from work. And the cops got mad because I missed the bus. And these buses only come by every 30 or 40, and it didn't matter to them. They let me go. But not after, casual conversation about, I reminded them of the oath they took and, violating the oath, mandatory fines, move public service and incarceration. I reminded them of their Miranda rights. I said, what do you mean my Miranda rights? There are Miranda rights. If they're mine, I'm giving them to you. Because right now what you're doing with this massive amount of questions, that's entrapment and that's illegal. You're literally looking for probable cause for arrest, and that probable cause is going to come through your question. Well, you didn't say that. You lied this. No. So I always, when they start asking me questions, I like to throw laws at them. This cop got mad because I reminded him about violating the oath. I gave him his Miranda rights and told him that what you're doing is entrapment. Trying to establish a probable cause, which is illegal. I says, what is this? A drive-by stop and frisk or a driving stop and frisk? I was stopped while I was driving. Got no tickets. Nothing. They just wanted to know what I was doing in the neighborhood, where I was going, where I was coming from. A block and a half away from where I lived. And it was a small area, so, small, amount of, the cops knew I lived there. They knew where I lived. Man, if I didn't know so many laws, I would probably be in prison for the rest of my life. But either way, people, I'm trying to help Pops from Legal Reform. That's my formal name, my given name. Never went by anything other. I don't have an alias, an AKA. I definitely don't have any street cred. I wasn't a street person. I had cops tell me if I didn't do this, didn't arrest me, but told me they would arrest me if I didn't go find guns for them or drugs for them. And how the hell am I gonna know? You're Mexican. You know, all you people sell drugs. I don't sell drugs. Well, you know people that do. I do. Yeah, all you people do. And put me on a mission to find guns for them. If I didn't find guns, I was going to jail. I asked for what? Well, worry about that if you don't find the guns. Well, worry about that if you don't find drugs for us. One idiot cop told me he'd give me $500 a key that I found. I pulled out my keys. I said, how much of these were? I'm talking about kilos of cocaine. You know, he's gonna give me, and that's so I don't go to jail. I don't know what for. I wasn't doing anything. Another cop wanted me to go keep an eye on a neighbor, find out where he hides his guns. He's an ex-con. He shouldn't have any guns. He was shooting in the alley, arguing with neighbors, brandishing a gun. Why are you coming to me? We thought because you talked to him, he was a neighbor from around the block. Sometimes he passed by, you say hi, whatever. We talked a few times. It's not like we became buddies. I wasn't invited to his wedding, his kids' birthday parties, none of that. I was never invited over, none of that. He spoke with the neighbors way more than he spoke with me. But they wanted me to go because, good neighbors, and they don't want to be bothered, and he don't want to bother them. So he went to somebody around the corner that has no dealings with the situation. And if I found the guns or where he hid them, that I wouldn't go to jail. And so the guy came walking past about a week or two after. I pulled out the cop's card, gang crimes detective. I forgot his name. I said, hey, this guy told me to find out where your guns so I don't go to jail. He said, what? I said, yeah, he told me if I don't find out where you hide these guns, he's going to lock me up for something. I don't know what, but he's going to lock me up for something. So the guy backs up, I know what you're talking about. I said, no, look, here's his card. I says, he says he knows you. You know him? I tried to show, and he just kept backing out. I said, come on, dude, I thought we was good. I thought you had me. Remember you were saying, I got you. Dude, this is going to keep me out of jail. And he never talked to me again. Hey, I was just being honest. And the cop literally sat out in front of the house, waited for me to come get the mail because the mailbox was on the street. And that's when he grabbed me. Grabbed me another time, walking across the street to get a Pepsi and telling me, you won't go to jail if you do this for me. We'll even pay you. But I met a few interns for the police department. Some people, when I laugh when I say interns, that's just a polite term for snitch, rat, confidential informant, He even threatened to ruin my street cred. I don't have street cred. I don't have like groups of friends. I don't even have a group of friends. My circle is very small. In high school, grammar school, I didn't have any friends. High school, I made a friend, Yayo, another friend, Fats. Those are my only friends in high school. Yayo, Louis. That's a bad boy there. Fats. He couldn't understand why my brother used to call me fat man, fat boy. You ain't fat. Nah, I used to be. But he used to crack up because I was always singing the song Fat Boy by Billy Stewart. But Either way, it's just crazy, all this racism going on, and just imagine how much less racism we would have if our politicians, our public servants have actually lived up to the oath and enforced it. They took an oath to serve the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence say, that we're all created equal, endowed by our Creator, not your Creator. I mean, some of us don't even believe in God, atheists. And the Constitution guarantees us freedom of religion and freedom from religion. And if we had freedom from religion, why'd they overturn Roe versus Wade? In the rules of professional conduct, it clearly states that all laws must be made in the public interest and not the interest of the bar or a parochial interest. And that was a parochial interest, a religious interest. And Code of Judicial Conduct forbids the judges from getting involved in anything political, and reversing Roe versus Wade was a political move. Politicians say, hey, we're going to do this. And they pressured. Well, it didn't take much to pressure the Supreme Court because, they're conservatives, they want to conserve their way of life, They want to bring back, the Jim Crow laws. McCarthyism is on the rise again, People are getting locked up just because they give their opinion. It's crazy. It's a crazy world. I mean, damn, the only way you're going to get through this, people, is to learn, know, and use the law. And I've been teaching you, showing you a lot of them on my page, Legal Reform, on Facebook. I also, like I said, post these videos, TikTok, YouTube, several other entities, Threads, Instagram, Reddit, wherever I can. Just try to help. Yeah. Imagine people growing up in the same neighborhood and living entirely different lives. But, she's probably going to unfriend me. We didn't actually know each other in high school. Nobody talked to me, Most of the girls I dated, I didn't go to school with. They were from schools in other neighborhoods. I used to go to other neighborhoods. Spent a lot of time with a lot of Puerto Ricans on the north side. I used to go to the north side when I was in high school a lot. Visited a lot of black neighborhoods, Inglewood. Hey, I only got hassled a couple times, and mostly it was by the police. Why, what I was doing in a black neighborhood? In the land of the free, my God, what the hell, And even in my own neighborhood, walk around my own neighborhood. What are you doing here? Where are you going? Where are you coming from? They get mad when I tell them they're breaking the law. When they go through my pockets, went through my wallet. When I was younger, they used to go through my wallet and empty it, just take my money and get the fuck out of here, And it happened to my dad. A few other relatives, I was told. But yeah, it's no, the immigration. It's not about illegal immigrants. Those are arbitrary laws. It's civil law. It's not criminal law. People say, oh, they broke the law crossing the border. Well, yeah, if we haven't destabilized their country, their economy, all these sanctions, where you don't allow your friends to associate with them, so they wind up being alone. And I know how that feels, But, if our government had sent people to overthrow their governments and to, pillage their public trust fund, the public trust doctrine, which is a staple in any democracy, and that gave them the legal right to do it. They actually stopped democracy from happening. or continuing. Same thing happened in Vietnam. There was an election. The guy that won the election, they didn't like him. So they said, no, we're going to go with this guy that we endorsed. We put a lot of money into his campaign. And eventually the Vietnam War broke out. But it was all over financial gain. The French invested a lot of money when they ruled Vietnam. They got chased out, went crying to the United States. Hey, look at how much money we borrowed from your banks to build these things. And, if you don't get it back for us, we can't go back there and get these things running again and pay you the money we owe you. It's over corporate profits, people. Corporate profits. Denying those people in that country what they loved about here, our Constitution. Voting, they didn't like that thing about taxation without representation, all the things we enjoyed here. See, that's why people are coming here to enjoy what they think is actually happening, according to our laws, but it's not happening. So if you don't want them to come, just tell them, hey, this doesn't count for us. What makes you think it's going to count for you? Nobody abides by the laws here, in public service. And you not being white, you're the first that's going to go down, especially since you immigrated here. Just tell them that. Be honest with them. Be honest with them. Just be honest with them. Tell them democracy doesn't exist. The rule of law doesn't exist. It's just a pipe dream. There's more reality in reality TV. It's just a pipe dream. To quote Martin Luther King, all we ask America is you stand up to what you put on paper. So what they put on paper, I take to court with me and throw that at them. Okay, so you should watch some of my videos. I just speak about the law and tell you how to get through it. Pops at Legal Reform. We are not a public servant, but we always consider it a privilege to serve the public. Informing them about their legal rights. Thank you and good night.